The entire conference room went silent the moment Gregory Wallace glanced down at the intern's badge, because just minutes earlier he had casually told her to go make coffee like she was invisible, like she didn't belong in the room, like she was just another intern who should stay quiet and follow orders. But the words printed under her name suddenly made his stomach drop. Harvard Business School, Executive Fellowship Program. And in that instant he realized the woman he had dismissed so easily might actually outrank half the people sitting in that room. But that moment hadn't happened yet. Just an hour earlier, the 22nd floor of Sterling and Rowe Consulting buzzed with the familiar chaos of Monday morning. Phones rang non-stop, keyboards clattered across open desks, assistants hurried through glass hallways carrying binders and tablets, and managers rushed toward the weekly strategy meeting like soldiers heading into battle. The company prided itself on efficiency and prestige. Clients paid millions for their advice, and the people who worked there liked to believe they were the smartest minds in corporate America. Standing quietly near the reception desk was someone most of them barely noticed. Her name was Amara Johnson, and it was her first day in the building. She wore a navy blazer, a simple white blouse, and carried a thin leather folder tucked neatly under her arm. There was nothing flashy about her appearance, nothing that screamed for attention. But there was something about the way she observed the office that suggested she was carefully studying everything. The rhythm of conversations, the tension in employees' voices, the subtle hierarchy that determined who spoke and who listened. Other interns clustered together nearby, whispering nervously and checking their phones while waiting for orientation to begin. Some looked excited, others intimidated. A few had already started introducing themselves to employees walking by, eager to make good impressions. Amara didn't rush. She simply watched. She had spent the last 2 years preparing for this moment, though no one around her knew that yet. Growing up in Atlanta, she had always been the kind of student teachers described as quiet but relentless. She rarely spoke unless she had something important to say, but when she did, people listened. Scholarships carried her through college. Long nights of studying and part-time jobs carried her through graduate school. And now she stood inside one of the most powerful consulting firms in the country, part of a leadership fellowship so selective that fewer than 10 students from the entire Harvard Business School program were chosen each year. But to anyone walking through the lobby that morning, she looked like just another intern waiting for instructions. That assumption was exactly what Gregory Wallace made when he stepped out of the elevator at 8:47 a.m. Gregory was the kind of manager employees recognized immediately, not just because of his expensive suits and perfectly styled hair, but because of the way he carried himself, as if the entire floor belonged to him. He had spent nearly a decade climbing the ranks at Sterling and Rowe, building a reputation for delivering results and demanding perfection from everyone beneath him. Interns in particular dreaded working under Gregory. He believed the fastest way to test someone's competence was to throw them into pressure immediately, and if they failed, he simply replaced them with someone else. As he walked toward the conference rooms with his laptop tucked under one arm, Gregory noticed Amara standing by the reception desk. To him, she looked exactly like every other nervous intern he had seen over the years. New, quiet, unsure where she belonged. Without slowing his stride, he placed his empty coffee mug on the counter beside her with a soft clink. "You," he said casually, barely looking at her face. "Intern." Amara turned toward him. Gregory gestured toward the hallway behind her. "The break room's down. There. Coffee machine's probably empty by now. Make a fresh pot and bring it to conference room B." His tone wasn't cruel, exactly. It was simply dismissive, the way someone might ask a receptionist to take a message. A few employees nearby glanced at the interaction, exchanging subtle looks but saying nothing. Gregory Wallace giving orders to interns was hardly unusual. For a brief moment, Amara looked at the mug resting on the counter between them. She could have corrected him. She could have explained that she wasn't technically an intern in the traditional sense, that she had been invited to the firm through a fellowship program designed to train future executives. She could have pointed to the badge clipped neatly to her blazer that explained everything. But instead she simply nodded politely. "Of course," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, almost thoughtful. Gregory had already turned away before she finished speaking, walking toward the conference room while scanning emails on his phone. As Amara picked up the mug and headed toward the break room, 2 interns standing near the elevator whispered quietly to each other. "Rough start," One of them murmured, "First day, and already stuck making coffee." The other shrugged. "Welcome to consulting." Inside the break room, the fluorescent lights hummed softly while the coffee machine sputtered in the corner. Amara rinsed the mug, filled the machine with water, and measured fresh grounds with the same careful precision she had used while conducting research during late nights at Harvard. She didn't appear embarrassed or frustrated. If anything, she looked slightly amused. Because while Gregory Wallace believed he had just given a simple order to an inexperienced intern, Amara already knew something he didn't. In less than an hour, everyone in conference room B would discover exactly who she was. And when they did, the entire dynamic of the morning was about to change in a way Gregory Wallace never saw coming. The moment Gregory Wallace read the words printed on Amara Johnson's badge, a quiet tension settled in his chest, but the meeting continued as if nothing unusual had happened, at least for everyone else. The presentation carried on, charts glowing on the large screen at the front of conference room B while analysts discussed market expansion strategies and projected growth numbers for a major client preparing to enter new international markets. Normally, Gregory would dominate a meeting like this, interrupting analysts, challenging assumptions, and pushing his team to defend every number in their reports. But today his focus kept drifting toward the far end of the table, where Amara now sat quietly reviewing the documents placed in front of her. Just 30 minutes earlier, he had barely looked at her when he told her to make coffee, assuming she was another intern trying to survive her first day at Sterling and Rowe Consulting. Yet the words he had just seen printed beneath her name kept replaying in his mind. Harvard Business School, Executive Fellowship Program. Gregory knew exactly what that meant. Sterling and Rowe partnered with a handful of elite business schools every year to bring in a small group of fellows, students chosen not just for internships, but for leadership development. Those fellows often worked directly with senior partners and sometimes had more influence than half the managers in the building. Gregory shifted slightly in his chair and leaned toward the analyst sitting beside him. "Who exactly is the new intern?" he whispered quietly. The analyst glanced toward Amara before answering. "That's Amara Johnson. She's one of the Harvard Fellows. They said she'll be working with the Executive Strategy Group this quarter." Gregory felt a subtle knot tighten in his stomach. The Executive Strategy Group reported directly to the firm's senior partners, the people who ultimately decided promotions, leadership assignments, and who stayed or left at the company. In other words, the people Gregory worked very hard to impress. At the front of the room, the presentation continued as another analyst pointed to a graph on the screen. "Based on our current projections," he explained confidently, "the client should see roughly 12% market growth by the third quarter once the expansion begins." A few managers nodded. Gregory forced himself to look back at the screen, though his mind remained unsettled. Across the table, Amara had been quietly reviewing the spreadsheet projected on the wall. She studied the numbers carefully, occasionally jotting small notes in the margin of her folder. For a moment, she seemed to hesitate. Then she slowly raised her hand. The room grew slightly quieter. New interns almost never spoke during their first strategy meeting, especially not while senior analysts were presenting. The analyst paused and looked toward her. "Yes." Amara stood and walked calmly toward the screen. Her voice was steady and respectful, but there was a quiet confidence behind it. "I may be mistaken," she said politely, "but I believe the growth model used in the third quarter projection might be outdated." Several people exchanged curious glances. Amara pointed to the spreadsheet. "The forecast assumes demand elasticity behaves the same way it did several years ago. But recent market shifts suggest consumers respond to pricing changes differently now, especially in Southeast Asia." She typed a few adjustments into the model. Instantly, the graph changed. Instead of 12% projected growth, the number jumped dramatically, nearly 30%. A low murmur spread around the table. One of the directors leaned forward slightly. "Where did you learn that model?" he asked. Amara gave a small, modest smile. "It was part of my research project at Harvard last semester," she explained. "We studied emerging markets and updated elasticity assumptions for digital economies." The director examined the updated numbers carefully before slowly nodding. "She's right," he admitted. "This projection actually makes more sense." Suddenly the atmosphere in the room shifted. The quiet intern sitting at the end of the table was no longer invisible. People were studying her now, realizing that she had just corrected a forecast tied to a multi-million-dollar expansion plan. Gregory felt his face warm slightly as the realization settled in. Less than an hour earlier, he had assumed she was just another inexperienced intern. Now she was calmly improving the company's strategy model in front of senior staff. Before the discussion could continue, the conference room door opened. The room instantly grew quiet as Daniel Carter, one of Sterling and Rowe's senior partners, stepped inside. Carter carried himself with the relaxed authority of someone used to running the entire floor. His eyes scanned the room briefly before landing on Amara, standing near the screen. His expression brightened immediately. "Ah, there you are," he said with a small smile. "I've been looking for you." Gregory felt his stomach sink. Carter walked toward the table and addressed the room. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Amara Johnson, our newest strategy fellow from Harvard Business School. She'll be working closely with leadership on several projects this quarter." Several employees nodded respectfully. Carter glanced at the updated spreadsheet still displayed on the screen. "Did you point out the projection issue?" he asked. Amara nodded calmly. "Just a small adjustment." Carter chuckled softly. Those small adjustments are usually worth millions in consulting. A few quiet laughs spread around the room. Gregory stared down at the table, wishing the meeting would end quickly. But Carter's attention was about to shift in a direction Gregory had hoped everyone had already forgotten. And when it did, the entire room would remember exactly how the morning had started, with a manager casually telling the wrong person to make his coffee. For a moment, the conference room remained completely silent as Daniel Carter finished introducing Amara Johnson to the team, and Gregory Wallace could feel the weight of every person in the room shifting slightly toward him, even though no one had said a word yet. Carter glanced once more at the updated spreadsheet on the screen and nodded with quiet approval before turning back toward the table. "Good catch on the projection," he said to Amara. "That kind of attention to detail is exactly why we bring fellows from Harvard into the strategy program." Amara gave a small, polite nod and returned to her seat. Carter then looked around the room briefly before his eyes settled on Gregory. "Greg," he said casually, "since Amara will be working with the operations team for the next few weeks while reviewing our expansion plans, I assume you've already had a chance to meet her." Gregory forced a tight smile, feeling his throat suddenly dry. "Yes," he said carefully. "We met earlier this morning." Carter raised an eyebrow slightly. "Oh," he asked. Before Gregory could say anything else, Amara spoke calmly from her seat. "Mr. Wallace helped me find the break room," she said with a gentle smile. A few people around the table chuckled quietly, understanding the meaning behind her words without her needing to explain further. Gregory felt heat rush to his face, but Carter simply watched the exchange for a moment before speaking again, his voice calm but firm. "Well," he said slowly, "first impressions in this business can be misleading." His eyes moved briefly between Gregory and Amara. The smartest people in the room are often the ones who don't feel the need to announce it. No one argued with that. The meeting soon returned to the agenda, but the atmosphere had changed. Employees who had barely noticed Amara when she walked in that morning were now listening carefully whenever she spoke, asking her questions about the market model she had corrected and inviting her input on the rest of the strategy plan. Gregory remained quieter than usual, focusing on his notes while replaying the morning's events in his mind. Later that afternoon, as employees began leaving their desks for the day, Gregory walked slowly toward the small workstation Amara had been assigned near the windows overlooking the city. She looked up from her laptop as he approached. For a moment he hesitated, something that rarely happened to him. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I made an assumption this morning before I knew anything about you." Amara studied him for a second, then closed her laptop. "It happens," she said calmly. Gregory nodded. "Still," he added, "it shouldn't have." For a brief moment there was silence between them before Amara gave a small, understanding smile. "What matters is what people do after they realize they were wrong," she said. Gregory let out a quiet breath and nodded again before turning to leave. As he walked back through the office, he realized something he wouldn't forget anytime soon. That morning he had seen a quiet woman standing near the reception desk and assumed she was just another intern meant to run errands and stay out of the way. But by the end of the day, that same woman had corrected a major strategy model, impressed a senior partner, and reminded an entire room of professionals that respect should never depend on assumptions.